Welcome back to the Student Athlete Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lemke. Today, we are diving into the mental side of resilience with mental skills consultant and certified breathwork specialist, Adalyne Fettig. Adalyne has helped athletes from youth to the pros overcome challenges, building mental strength, and achieving a growth mindset. Last time we had her on the episode in episode 4, highly recommend that episode, where we talked about growth versus fixed mindset and talking about overcoming fear of failure. Today, we are talking how to build mental resilience in sports. So, Adalyne, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Of course. I was just telling her before we hopped on that there are so many different areas of this that you guys as athletes need to work on and have those opportunities to work on. And so we could go for hours on this, but we're going to focus specifically on the resilience piece today. So we know resilience is talked a lot about in sports, especially in more of the more physical sports, I would say, like football and whatnot. But what does resilience actually truly mean for athletes?
Yeah, so that's something that I see get mixed up a lot with a lot of athletes because a lot of times that resilience is one of those things that you either have it or you don't. And that's what athletes envision and that's what coaches kind of pound into their brains, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. That resilience is like any other physical skill or mental skill. It's a learned trait. And it's something that basically is your ability to find consistency in what you're doing and continually show up regardless of the circumstances or situation you're in and deliver the same or similar results as you have in the past with that upward trajectory. And sometimes that upward trajectory can have little bumps in it and we can see plateaus. But if you zoom out of that individual's generalized growth, it is that full, nice upward lean towards progress and improving.
So it's not like cut and dry, it's not you have it or you don't. It's
Yep.
that progression.
Absolutely. And that's where I see a lot of athletes and coaches kind of get mixed up when describing resilience, because a lot of times, especially in some of those physical sports, like you mentioned, and sometimes even more so like male dominated sports, it is like white knuckle through it and suck it up and get through it kind of thing, which sometimes there's a little bit of that, but it's a lot of training your headspace and your habits to show up in a consistent way that is working for you and finding that rhythm and pattern that continuously keeps you motivated rather than feeling like you have to drag yourself through something. You're finding that intrinsic motivation to continue to keep going and keep showing up on days that are challenging and are hard.
We're definitely got to follow up on the intrinsic motivation. I know that as we talked about like implementation, definitely want to talk about that because I think that's right. Important. Why is resilience so important for that long-term success?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you do in life, there's going to be challenges. That is pretty much a guarantee. And so finding that resilience and finding that inner motivation and essentially that grit to sustain through something is invaluable, because as soon as one of those challenges come and hits you, if you don't have that certain level of resilience, you're not going to be able to make it through. And you're definitely not going to be able to make it through that at performing at a high level like you want to be. And so resilience adds a lot of extra support through those challenges. And it reminds you that it's not going to be all smooth sailing. It's not going to be a walk in the park like sometimes we might want it to be, but you do have the tools and resources and capabilities to get through whatever storm is thrown your way.
So I've had Ronnie Burnick recently on the podcast, and he's gone through a lot, like went through a lot of abuse as a kid. And, I've gone through a lot of challenges through losing parents and all that kind of stuff. Do you feel like resilience is grown through those difficult situations, or what about the people who don't develop that resilience and they end up becoming that alcoholic or becoming that person?
Absolutely. So pretty much with anything in life, we have about two options of what we can do. We can either rise to certain occasions and we can work through it, or we can default to things that feel easy in the moment. And that's where that learned trait of resilience kind of comes in, where some individuals like you and some of your other athletes are able to develop and grow and find this resilience and rise to those occasions and learn that trait of resilience so that it flows into all other areas of life. Or there's an option to kind of like go on autopilot a little bit and take that road that feels easy in the moment. The thing is with those is they're both hard. They're just hard in different ways, right?
Yeah.
So when you're learning a trait that you want, and kind of with anything, a new skill, a different mindset, whatever you're working on in that time, it's hard at the beginning. It's hard as you develop it. It's hard to push through. That's not something we can work around. But if you choose kind of that easy way out, it feels easy in the beginning because it just defaults and it kind of just happens to you. But then it's hard later, and you deal with those challenges for longer, and it's something that you get stuck in. And so it's just about choosing your hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that phrase, that choosing
Yeah.
your heart. I think that's, yeah. But I feel like we need to actually really sit with it more. And maybe that's where we talk about in the implementation. I kind of want to hear that sitting with what are some things.
Yeah.
But I want to get into some specific examples. So I know, for example, like a lot of athletes doubt their abilities. I know this was definitely something I struggled with as a kid. So they don't get the star, or they don't get the offers they want, or maybe they mess up on a really key play. Like I feel like I just saw this in the Ultimate Warrior, or the whatever you call it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So guy literally fell on the first obstacle, and it's just those like little things. And so we play those scenes in our head, and we start doubting our abilities. In those situations, what's the most important thing that athletes should remember about resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where another aspect of that learned trait of resilience comes in. Resilience, a huge piece of it is controlling the narrative in your head and controlling what your thoughts sound like. So in those situations, those are going to happen to people. Those types of things are kind of inevitable. Mistakes happen. There's going to be things that set you back. It's part of it. Any challenge that any opportunity, anything that you're trying, there's going to be those hardships that come along with it. But if you are working on your resilience, if you are someone who has that resilience, it is vital for you to word those thoughts in your head in the most beneficial and productive way to help you sustain through it. Because when you look at two different athletes in the exact same situation, like let's use like dropping a pass in football, or like a touchdown pass, even more, feeling like a little bit more pressure, maybe a little bit more frustration or disappointment. In that situation, an athlete who doesn't necessarily have that high level of resilience or that control over their headspace is going to nitpick themselves to pieces. They are going to get frustrated with themselves. They're going to doubt those abilities. They're going to start picking themselves apart. Why did you do this? I can't believe I dropped that. Or even start blaming the people around them. As opposed to athletes who have that resilience or are developing that resilience are going to acknowledge that wasn't what they wanted. It's not about sweeping things under the rug and pretending mistakes aren't an issue, but it's saying, I have the tools and skill set to come back from this and fix this mistake so that the next play I am better from this and I give myself more opportunities to perform at a high level rather than allowing this mistake to define the rest of my game.
Yeah, I think that's so big. And I feel like I've also heard when they talk about looking back at all the times you won, all the times that you did do well, like the touchdowns you did get and all those kind of things. What would you say on that note?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important for all athletes to have a balanced perspective of their capabilities. Often I see athletes in a bubble of all of the things that they did wrong, including those athletes who have a heightened sense of confidence. It's more of that false confidence
Yeah,
in
yeah.
those situations, but it's all they can think of after a practice is the things that went wrong. All they can talk about after games are the mistakes they made. And again, it's not sweeping those under the rug, but it's looking at games and practices and any life situation in a realistic lens and realizing, okay, I have things to work on. There are mistakes I want to address, but there are a lot of things that I did really well today and things that I want to continue working on into the future. And so finding that clarity and balance of okay, I made 5 mistakes today, but I also did 100 things really, really well. And realizing that it's not all the bad things, because we fall into this trap of availability bias, which is basically what's happening right in front of me is what has always happened and what is going to always happen in the future. And it puts us in a situation where mistakes feel like our entire world. And it puts us on track to quitting and giving up or failing a lot more. And that resilience is just kind of chipped away. And we're put in a situation where we get really stuck. And so if we find that clarity of, okay, I realize I want to work on things and there are things that I'm doing well, the sky's kind of the limit. That resilience is going to continue to grow really effectively. Your confidence is going to feel better. You're going to start performing way better because your confidence is and resilience is at a high level. You're focusing on the things that you're doing well, not just the things you're doing wrong. It just sets you up for so much more success to have that realistic perspective of what's going on rather than that tainted, doubtful, disappointed version of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. We could sit on that one for what, even just alone. But I know this will carry over to the next situation I want to bring up, and this is the part where we were talking about like this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this episode, and that's when, you know, in the example of we don't get the star or we lose an opportunity on a team type of thing, and it translates into us wanting to team hop. And we see this in the youth, the high school, the colleges, you know, with the transfer portal nowadays, but also just, I mean, we see it with, I mean, travel teams, everything.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on how this team hopping affects mental resilience and growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are absolutely appropriate times to switch teams and transfer, and each athlete is different in that experience. But the times that are damaging are the ones that you just described, where athletes are not fitting in a team because of like they haven't put like the work in to work with like the coaches or the teammates, or they're not getting the playing time that they want, or they just like feel like they can bubble better in a different environment without putting a whole lot of thought into it and just kind of using emotion to drive that decision rather than facts and clarity and what might actually be best for them. That can be really, really dangerous for athletes to feel like that's an easy default. I've seen this a handful of times with different athletes where transferring is their off ramp to hard situations and difficult environments, which again, there are correct times to transfer. But if it is your first instinct when stuff gets a little bit hard, it starts programming your brain that there are off ramps all in life and that you can just give up and quit or try something else at any given moment. And what our brain actually starts to do is learn that quitting is really available to us. And so it doesn't just impact maybe like switching teams or transferring, it impacts how you're showing up on the field, it impacts how you're showing up in relationships, in the classroom, once you get a job, all of those different areas, because your brain has built a habit out of quitting. And what it actually starts doing, and what we've seen a lot in the research, is it doesn't just happen at the same rate it always does. It's not just like, okay, I quit 10 days in. It starts getting shorter because our brain likes when things are easy for us, and it will always default to the easier option. And as soon as you start putting that habit into place of quitting is a choice for me and it's really easy and available for me, your brain's going to be like, oh, well, next time I'm going to quit at 9 days. Okay, next time 8 days. And then it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And then you're at a point where you're like, I can't do anything because everything's too hard for me. And I don't have the motivation, drive, or even desire to do any of this. And it puts you in an impossible situation that's really, really hard to dig yourself out of. So finding the opportunity, if you're in a position where you are questioning if that team is right for you, it's really important to look at exactly what's going on from as much unbiased perspective as you can, understand what it might look like on your next team, because those challenges might still exist. And that's something I don't know that a lot of athletes always look at, and they think that the grass is essentially
Yeah,
greener on the
I
other
was
side,
literally
right?
just thinking that, right?
And it's not a lot of times, and there's worse problems that come up or harder challenges, and then you put yourself back because now you're starting from ground zero. You're with a whole new environment, a whole new team, a whole new system, and you've taught your brain possibly some bad habits in that process. And again, you can transfer and switch teams without creating that bad habit of quitting if it's done in a really thoughtful way and you've given yourself the opportunity to look at all the facts of the situation and you realize, I'm not doing this out of emotion. I'm not doing this because this feels too hard in not a good way. Like it feels too hard in an easy way kind of thing, but it is something that just isn't like a genuine fit. Great. That is an awesome opportunity for you to switch, and it won't do that damage to your habits and what your brain is working through with quitting, but it's something that really needs to be thought out, or there can be some pretty lasting severe impacts of transferring.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we see that just in daily life too, like with relationships. Like I feel like that's another thing, and that's a lot of, I feel like, our culture. It's not just sports, but we see it in our culture as well. Like I mean, divorce rates over 50%, I think, at this point, and things like that. I mean, my dad was married 3 times, engaged 6 times, and had multiple other girlfriends, and it's like it's that inability to look at yourself and be like, am I the problem?
Sure. Important. It's something that we all need to do consistently, not just in sports, but through life, is take that accountability and look and give yourself opportunity to review. I think we talked about that a little bit in our previous episode, but review is one of the most beneficial tools for all areas of life, giving yourself 5-10 minutes at the end of the day, end of the week, to review what that week or day was like for you and how you showed up in good ways and how you didn't show up how you wanted to, and use the opportunity to grow and advance and build that resilience and grit to get through some hard stuff.
Yeah, that's yeah, and I know, again, we can continue on that for sure. I also want to get into strategies though. So first off, I actually want to start with the parents and the coach side of things. So what are some practical ways parents and coaches can support building that resilience for these athletes, in especially in those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a coach and a parent, you guys are at very unique positions to support your athletes in really, really effective ways, but it's not always in the ways that you expect it to be. I see a lot of coaches and or parents in a position where they want to support those athletes so much, but they're almost doing it for them kind of thing. And with Headspace, that's not something, not, but it is something you can support and facilitate through. And so checking in with athletes and asking them those good questions of what did you learn from today's practice? What went well for you? What are some corrections you want to make? And always it depends on those relationships and what those look like, but giving an opportunity and like the floor to discuss things is always really vital. Another really important component that I don't think gets talked enough with coaches is basically retaining athletes doesn't always just look like caring about them on the field, but caring about them off the field and making sure that those athletes feel supported and essentially bonded to you and the program outside of the sport is imperative to low turnover rates in sports and on teams. And so if there's opportunities throughout the season or going into seasons to go have a pizza party somewhere or like go bowling together or do something silly that isn't related to that sport, really skyrockets your sustainability and how many athletes stick around in that sport, because athletes start to find that connection and they start to not only build those relationships, but they start to build a version of resilience because they feel invested in something. And so it's setting them up for a lot of success for that confidence and resilience on the field because they have something they want to be resilient for because they have that environment. And then again, like I said at the beginning, for parents and coaches too, just asking questions about where are you at, what's going on, in a way that doesn't feel like too
Investigative.
yeah, there you go. That's a good
Like
that's
an
a
FBI
perfect
agent, just like,
exactly. And so even I've had some parents in the past do like their like the drive home or like as soon as their athlete gets home, like check in with them, like, oh, what are like 3 things that you feel like went well today at practice. And that starts to create that environment where athletes find that balance of things that they want to improve on and things that go well, because odds are they're already going through the things that they didn't do well in their head. And so giving them the opportunity to talk about what did go well opens up the door for a much more healthy and resilience oriented perspective.
Yeah, I like that. And I like there's also like when you talk about that, some examples of, I know Tom Brady, there's some videos of him talking about his parents and some of the things, like even his mom, like encouraging him with the speed thing. She's like, I'm slow, mom. And she's like, no, no, no. And then like Ed Milet's another example. I know he talked on one of his recent podcasts about how I think it was his dad that was encouraging him on a lot of those things and helping him identify, like, yeah, that was a sack fly, or that was even just a ground out, but like, look at what you did. You gunned it down the line, or things like that.
Yeah. And that's so important because a lot of times parents are able to give that perspective of what's actually going on, and hopefully they can stay unbiased towards their mistakes as well and support their kids through that. And it's not about hounding them on the mistakes. It's not about forcing them to do things or stick with something, because usually that creates a resistance to something rather than a resilience in something. But if you're setting up opportunities for them to feel supported in it and giving them the opportunities that they are seeking out, or if they tell you, like, if your athlete or your child like comes to you and says like, hey, I want to do this, then walk through, what does that look like for you? If you want to go play D1 ball, all right, like, where are you now? What does it look like for you to go play somewhere? What do we need to make happen right now? So that means getting those extra work in. That means getting extra support from people like us who can help with the mental side and help them with their nutrition. That means getting speed work in. That means doing that, taking that extra step and going that extra mile really creates a really healthy environment for them to feel really supported, but not forced in anything. And so it's a fine line to walk, but giving them opportunity. And then, like you said, with those examples, like supporting them and letting them know that there's room for improvement, but you're doing well. And there's a lot of good that came out of today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. What about for the athletes specifically? What are some simple steps that they could do on a daily basis? Like, what are to build that mental resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. So resilience is all about that intrinsic motivation, right? So that is everything inside of yourself rather than those outside factors. So instead of your coach telling you you did a good job, or winning medals, or doing things like that, those are all extrinsic. And those are things that feel nice for a little bit, but they're not sustainable, because there's a lot of times in sports where you can't control those things. And there's a lot of times where those aren't coming at you consistently. So we need to find a way to be our own motivation. And that looks like setting those goals for yourself and creating that internal battle and internal competition that keeps you motivated and keeps you like focused on the step in front of you and taking one step in front of the other. So set daily goals. Give yourself an opportunity to challenge yourself on a consistent basis and be your own personal competition. It's not about what people are doing around you. That's where we find really big waves in athletes' performance and that level of resilience, because one day you're this fantastic athlete, the best on the team, and then you go to college and you're like everybody else, and you're having to start that battle all over, and you're comparing yourself on that journey to, like, if you're a freshman to seniors who have started for 4 years. There's that big discrepancy because you haven't had that time, and if you aren't starting to get that validation, your motivation is going to go out that window, and that's a really good opportunity for people to quit, right? And so if we find that internal battle and we keep pushing against ourselves, we're going to find that resilience a lot better. So daily goals that are really clean cut and simple. You can also set like bigger scale goals, but it's always important to be working on those daily. Otherwise, those get put in a drawer somewhere and forgotten about for a long time, as well as controlling that inner narrative and finding that balance to, how am I doing today? And what went well for me versus what didn't. So one of the easiest and one of my favorite things to recommend to athletes, because it's a does all tool, is what are 3 things you did well after practice every single day. It's so simple. Most of my athletes are able to do it like in the 5 minutes that they're like changing their shoes after practice or things like that. But it's just a pulse check of how are things going. And then it sets you up for a really good review process for the rest of the evening. And then going into the next day, what's going to happen is you're going to start looking for the things that you did well. So in practice tomorrow, you're going to start seeing, oh, this is good. I'm doing this well too. And what's going to happen is that confidence is going to go up. Your motivation for things are going to go up. And then you're not so hard on yourself, picking yourself apart over things that aren't as big of a deal. And that resilience is going to expand because you have that understanding of, okay, things are going to be hard sometimes. I can make mistakes. That's allowed because I know how to recover from them. So when those happen, it doesn't feel like, might as well give up. I need to quit because I can't do anything right.
Yeah.
So those would be the best, those daily goals, and then consistent positive review.
Okay. Should they do all that, like the goals and the review, should they do that all in their head, or how does that compare to writing it down?
I am a huge fan of writing things down. It gives you an opportunity to look at the facts and look at things a lot more clearly. Your brain processes things a lot better, so you're much more likely to remember them. It's more likely to kind of be locked in there. That's not always realistic for some athletes, and I understand that. So if you find yourself having a challenging time writing it down consistently, find what works for you. Once a week, go in and write like 10 things you did well throughout the whole week and your goal for this next week, and then still check in on that every day in your head. Because again, like some athletes, it just doesn't work, and that's fine. But you're going to see a lot more rapid and effective growth if you are writing those things down, because it's actually going to stick in your brain rather than be something that you remember for the first 10 minutes of practice and then it's out of there.
Yeah. So this whole intrinsic versus extrinsic also makes me think about, this is very, very common in football, not as much in the other sports, is when it comes to the offers, Twitter, Instagram, all the things get blown up with, oh, I got offered this school and this school and this school and this school, versus other players, you never see that.
Yep.
How do you feel like that, like, yeah, I'm just going to let you riff on it.
Yeah. So that is a really hard place to be in. And I know that challenge for athletes is very real, and it's very, very impactful. And I've seen it time and time again, of that comparison game, right? Like you're seeing all over social media, this recognition, these offers, these opportunities getting thrown to certain athletes. And then you're on the other side of that and you're not experiencing that. That's hard. And that's not a nice feeling to be in. So my first recommendation to all those athletes in that situation, not always an easy one either, but stay off social media. You don't need to see it. It's not something you need to be dwelling on. If you need to be posting to get that recognition and for coaches to be seeing you, and that's part of your process, go for it, but then be done with it. The more you're seeing that, the more your brain starts to play those comparison games and kind of dig yourself a hole. And so you don't need to be looking at it. It's not worth your time. It's not going to help you in any way. It's not going to do anything good. And so just avoid that as much as you can in that time. And then stay focused on what you can control, whether that's reaching out to coaches, whether that's continuing to train, whether that's collecting more film, whatever that means for you. Work on those things, because there is always something you can be doing to increase your game, increase your exposure. But you can't control when coaches reach out to you, right? And so giving yourself the opportunity to not dwell on, okay, why am I not the only one getting reached out to? Why am I not hearing from these coaches? I know I'm better than this person and I'm not getting the offers they're getting. It turns into this like unnecessary, nasty spiral, and it puts athletes kind of in a chokehold. Like I've had a lot of athletes really, really struggle with that, because it's an easy place to get stuck in, because it is a challenging time to go through. And so giving yourself things to focus on that are really beneficial for you, and things that are actually going to help you get an offer or perform well once you do get an offer, or put yourself in a position to be in a better opportunity to walk on somewhere. Those are just things that will advance you rather than pull you into a pretty rough place to pull out of. Because what I see too is those athletes who get really caught in those loops of, why is this not happening? What's going on here? I'm like stuck on all those uncontrollables. They'll get an offer and get excited about it, but then those doubts still stick. You'll talk to them a couple months later and you'll hear like a drop in their confidence, a drop in their consistency, a drop in their motivation, because all of those doubts and that focus on things outside of their control are sticky. Our thoughts aren't something that just come and go without impact. Even if it's something that you feel like, oh, like I forgot about that, that's not that serious anymore, that train of thought, if it was long enough and impactful enough, will have an effect on you down the road. And so that's where we need to go in and be like, okay, I understand this is a tough situation. Let's adjust where my headspace is at, because it kind of goes in and does some housekeeping in your brain and corrects some of those more unproductive trains of thought and puts you in a more successful headspace moving forward rather than hanging on to some of those bad habits.
Yeah, and I think that's and that can be dangerous in many situations for sure. So I like that you riff on that for sure. I also want to ask though, for the athlete who is posting all of those offers.
Yeah.
Because the extrinsic versus intrinsic, like, do you feel like that can be dangerous in some ways where they're feeding off of all of that attention?
Yeah. So there's again two ways that you can kind of handle it. I see a lot of athletes handle that with such grace and excitement, and I love to see it. Like it's fantastic. I'm happy to see you win. I love you getting all those offers. Take it in, embrace it, celebrate that accomplishment, but don't let it blow your head out of proportion, right? There is still a whole bunch of work that you need to be doing in the off season. So don't feel like because you're getting these offers, you're done and you've made it. Because I see that happen a lot, even on like the pro level. Like once athletes starting get more attention or start getting in a position where they feel like they're that guy and they have an easy walk into the NFL, they turn on autopilot. They're like, I got this. It's fine. This is going to be easy. Like I am that guy. You're going to be humbled really, really quickly. And you're going to be put in a position where the people around you who maybe weren't getting as much attention as you at first are going to start passing you because they're still working. They're still trying to improve. And so don't ever get so lost in the hype that you forget what got you to the point where all this hype came your way, right? So stay focused on those fundamentals, stay focused on that hard work and the things that you've been doing to get to this place, and continue to lean into those because there's always more room to grow. And that's where some of those issues with intrinsic and extrinsic motivation comes from. If you are naturally more extrinsically motivated, you just got all the validation you need that you're good, and you're going to unplug and be and coast, right? And that's where we need to. So if you feel like you're in that position and you've gotten this attention and you feel like you want to coast, going back to where we talked about last time, that growth mindset, plug back into goals, refocus on what you're trying to do, and continue that grind, because we don't want you in a position where you're passed by everyone around you because you've stopped working.
Yeah, that's I think, and again, this is why there's seriously so many things we can unpack. Like I feel like it's just such a layered topic that there's so many different levels to that. And I really appreciate you diving deep into those. As we wrap up, even though we see a lot of very, very successful people, like the number of very successful people I hear, male and female, saying the same thing over and over again, which is get counseling, get help. Like everybody needs counseling essentially. We still have that stigma around counseling, around this mental health space,
Yeah.
basically. So how can seeking guidance and support contribute to more of a resilient mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, resilience is a learned trait, and it's something that you can always be working on and developing. And a lot of times athletes just don't have the resources to do it themselves. And parents and coaches, it's not necessarily like their forte or their job to do that. And so getting that outside support from people who can facilitate you through that is vital. And there's different versions of that support. And there are people who need more directed counseling and regular psychological support from therapists. And that's a fantastic thing to be reaching out to and getting that support if you feel like you need it. I don't think it's ever a bad thing. And if it's something that feels uncomfortable for you, then find someone who feels safe and talk to them about what that process might look like if they can support you that way, and find someone who feels like a good fit for you. And on the performance side of things, which is more my expertise, finding someone to give you those tools and resources to help you continue to grow and get to the place that you're trying to grow and get to is vital. My whole goal in my profession is to close the gap between performance and potential. And so if you feel like you're stuck in that space and you've hit that plateau, or even if you feel like you're in a great place, there's always room to grow. And that growth mindset is vital in all successful athletes. And that's where I come in.
Yes. Yes. So I highly recommend people reach out to Adalyne. Her details are in the show notes, so you guys can see those down below. Any last things you want to leave the audience?
Yeah, there are a lot of really great opportunities for you to get extra support from people like Nick and people like myself to grow that extra level. And so continue to be curious about how you can grow and what can improve and how you can develop deeper. So look into all those avenues, whether that's continuing to build in different strength training opportunities, or your flexibility, or your headspace, or your nutrition, or your sleep schedules. There are so many different areas that you can be doing more. And if sports are something you're really serious about, then look into all those avenues.
Yes, definitely. And that I really want to emphasize too, when you talk about that potential piece, I really like that, I'm in the same position where nutrition is part of that unlocking piece. And as an athlete, think about it this way. Like, I like to think about it as mountains. You can say like 1 to 100, say somebody else's potential is 100, your potential is 75. You go to your potential, but the other person only goes to 60% of their potential. You beat them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's always more to be unlocked, and you can always continue to expand your capability. And it's really important to have people in your corner that know how to help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if you are like, yeah, maybe I'm not as naturally gifted as an athlete as so-and-so, you can still beat them.
Yeah.
That comes through the mind, comes through the nutrition, comes through all the work that you put into it, for sure. But Adalyne, thank you so much for joining us today and just sharing all of that knowledge and those examples too, those exercises that we can be doing to better that resilience.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So athletes, parents, remember, build these routines. Get some of these exercises into your normal routine, start implementing them, and you're going to see a lot more growth in your resilience. And until next time, keep striving for greatness.